The booking form settings allow you to customize the look and feel of the booking process once you have enabled bookings for your website. These settings can be found on the booking page in the website editor. Now we'll explain the different options available in the Layout tab on the booking form settings. From your booking form, hover over the Settings tab and click there. You'll immediately be taken to your booking form settings pop-up. The Layout tab allows you to control the overall setup and details seen on the booking form. This includes specifying how the booking form steps should be displayed and where it should be located. First, let's take a look at the Layout option. The Layout option lets you choose if booking steps will be displayed in separate tabs or placed directly below each other. There are two options for the layout: Simple and Tabs. With the Simple option, this will show the booking form steps one after the other, continuously down the page in blocks. This is how it will appear on the booking form. The Tab option displays each booking step in a separate tab. As the guest completes one step, they will have to click a button to continue to the next step. You can see the separate tabs here on the booking form page. Moving on to Steps, this section lets you specify how the blocks or tabs should be displayed. You'll also be able to choose whether to include a complete step as part of the booking process, which will allow guests to review their information before submitting the booking. Keep in mind that the tab bar and Back to Rental button will only be available when the tab layout is selected. The options available to be customized for steps are None, Collapsible, and Collapsible with step number. When None is selected, there will be no arrow to collapse or expand the different booking steps. In the case of blocks or simple layout, the guest will need to scroll down to see the next step. You can see the examples here. For the tab layout, this option will only be obvious for smaller screens where the tabs are displayed in blocks. You can see the perfect example here. Next, the collapsible option. With the collapsible option, blocks will have arrows allowing you to collapse and expand the steps instead of having to scroll to get to the other steps. You can see a perfect example here. And finally, collapsible with step number. Collapsible with step number displays arrows at the right of the step, allowing you to collapse and expand instead of having to scroll to get to the other steps, while also placing step numbers next to the step tiles. You can see the perfect example here. Next, let's take a look at the tabs bar. With the tab bar, there are three options: Detailed, Detailed with step number, and Simple. The Detailed option will display the title of the tab. You can see the examples here. Next, Detailed with step number. The Detailed with step number option will display the step number along with the title of the tab. You can see the step numbers here. And finally, the Simple option. The Simple option shows the current step with an indication of the next step below the tab title. Once the details have been completed on the current step, you'll be able to navigate to the next step. This is ideal for small screen sizes. While using the Simple tab bar and selecting Contrast on the Style tab, this is how the booking form will appear. When using the Light style, this is how the booking form will appear. Next, let's move on to the Complete Step tab. You can choose Enabled or Disabled. Choosing Enable will show an additional step as the final step in the booking process. This step allows the guest to review their information before submitting the booking. This is how the booking form will appear. Next, let's look at the Back to Rental button. The Back to Rental button can either be set to visible or hidden. When visible is selected, this button will be shown on the first step, allowing guests to click it to go back to the rental details page. You can see the example here. Scrolling down to the booking form info, this section lets you specify where the booking form should be placed and allows you to adjust how the booking dates and guest count input fields are displayed. Let's take a look at the booking info form placement. You can choose between tab or sidebar. When the tab button is selected, the booking info form will be displayed as the first step in the booking tab or block. While using the simple layout, the booking info form is the first step of the block. You can see the example here. Using the tab layout, the booking info form is the first step in the tab. You can see the example here. The next part of the placement is the sidebar. When sidebar is selected, the booking form info will show in the sidebar area instead. You can see the example here. Moving forward to date input, you can choose between simple, simple with label, and detailed. The simple date input option allows the check-in and check-out fields to be shown on one line. This is always the case when the booking info form is in the sidebar. However, when the booking info form is in a tab, the date inputs will only show on one line in the smaller devices. Here's the example of the sidebar showing date inputs on one line. The next tab is the simple date input selected on a larger screen. You can see the example here. When the tab with simple date input is selected on a small screen, this is how it will appear. Moving to the next part of the date input, simple with label. The simple with label date input option allows the check-in and check-out fields to be shown on one line with a label. This is always the case when the booking info form is in the sidebar. However, when the booking info form is in a tab, the date inputs will only show on one line on smaller devices. In larger screens, the detailed views would be seen. Let's look at an example of a sidebar showing date inputs on one line with labels. You can see the examples here. Now let's take a look at an example with tab, simple with label, on a large screen. You can see the examples here. Let's take a look at an example with a small screen. You can see the examples here. And finally, let's take a look at date input with detailed. The detailed option shows the check-in and check-out dates separately and with labels. This is always the case regardless of whether the date inputs are in the sidebar or on a tab, and for any screen size. You can see the example here. And now moving forward to guest input. You can choose between simple and detailed. When the simple guest input is selected, the guest option will display on one line that will expand when clicked to allow to input values for adults and children. This is always the case when the booking info form is in the sidebar. However, when the booking info form is in a tab, the guest inputs will only show on one line on smaller devices. In larger screens, the detailed view will be seen. Let's take a look at an example of sidebar showing guest input on one line with labels. You can see the example here. Now let's look at the expanded view when clicked. You can see the examples here. Now let's take a look at tab with simple guest input selected on a large screen. You can see the examples here. Now let's take a look at the same information on a small screen. You can see the example here. Now let's take a look at guest input set to detailed. The detailed option shows the adult and children input fields separately and with labels. This is always the case regardless of whether the guest inputs are in the sidebar or on a tab and for any screen size. Let's take a look at the example now. You can see the separate input fields here. Now let's move on to phone number. You can choose this if you will require guests to enter a country code with their phone number, or if and how a default value should be added. Here you can also specify if you would like the phone numbers to be validated. The country code options are as follows: disable, no default country, default to rental country, default to website country, and auto-detect guest country. When the disable option is chosen, this option allows guests to enter a telephone number without a country code. You can see the example here. The next option is no default country. With no default country option, when the guest clicks into the phone number field, a pop-up with a search bar will be available, allowing guests to find and select their country code. You can see the examples here. Next is default to rental country. With default to rental country option, the country code from the rental will automatically be filled into the telephone field. You can see the example here. Next, let's take a look at default to website country. With default to website country option, the country code that is saved for the website will automatically be filled into the telephone field. Next, auto detect guest country. Under the auto detect guest country, using guest IP info lookup option will automatically fill in the country code based on the guest IP information. And lastly, we'll look at validate phone number. The validate phone number can either be enabled or disabled. Enabling it will allow the phone number entered to be validated. If there is an issue with the value entered, the guest will be prompted to correct it. You can see the example here. With your booking form layout, you can customize and get the best out of your web-ready website.